You don't belong here. The words slid across the golden ballroom like shards of glass, sharp enough to slice through silk and pride alike. The music faltered for only a moment, violins whispering in hesitation, before continuing as though trying to drown out the cruelty. But it was too late. Everyone near the crystal chandeliers had heard it. Lena Brooks stood near the marble entrance, her sequin dress catching the glow of chandeliers that hung like frozen suns. She had arrived at the invitation-only gala, one of the most prestigious gatherings of the season, hosted by the Whitmore family, a dynasty known for wealth so old it seemed carved into the walls of America itself. And yet, to them, Lena was invisible. Or worse, unwelcome. A tall man in a tailored white tuxedo, his silver cufflinks shaped like family crests, sneered at her. "Security must have slipped up tonight," he said loudly, ensuring nearby guests caught every syllable. Laughter rippled through his small circle of equally polished companions, expensive pearls, diamond cufflinks, and practiced arrogance. Lena felt every eye shift toward her, scanning her like an intruder who had wandered into sacred space. Whispers curled around the ballroom. "Who is she? Does she work here? She's dressed nicely but still." And then the final sting. A younger woman, no older than 25, draped in white satin, tilted her champagne flute with a mocking smirk. "It's adorable, really. Thinking you can blend in." The words landed heavy, not because Lena hadn't heard them before, but because of what they revealed. Prejudice wrapped in wealth, arrogance dressed as tradition. For a moment, Lena remained silent, breathing slowly, remembering her grandmother's voice, the one that rose in gospel hymns during church services back in Montgomery. "Baby, when the world tries to shrink you, let your spirit rise taller." Her spirit wanted to rise, but her heart ached. This wasn't just a party. This was the closing dinner for a historic deal. The Whitmore family, known for their billion-dollar empire in real estate and global investments, had invited stakeholders, executives, and dignitaries. Unknown to most in the room, Lena wasn't just a guest. She was the architect of the very deal that would reshape their empire. Her company, built from scratch, had negotiated with the Whitmores for over a year. And tonight was supposed to be a celebration of partnership, unity, and progress. Instead, it had become a stage for humiliation. Have you ever, Lena thought, stood in a room filled with chandeliers, yet felt the weight of centuries of shadows pressing down on you? The crowd didn't wait for an answer. They parted slightly, allowing the Whitmore matriarch, Eleanor Whitmore herself, to approach. Her gown shimmered like liquid silver, and her smile carried the polished charm of someone used to commanding every room she entered. "My dear," Eleanor said sweetly, though her eyes betrayed something colder, "I believe you may be at the wrong event. This is a private gathering for family, partners, and an appropriate company." Lena's chest tightened. The dismissiveness wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate, rooted in the assumption that she could not possibly belong among billionaires. But before Lena could respond, the orchestra swelled again, masking the growing murmurs of the crowd. Glasses clinked, cameras flashed, and yet the tension at the entrance remained thick enough to choke on. A young black server passed by, his tray trembling slightly as he avoided eye contact. Lena saw his fear, his silent apology, his recognition of the scene. She offered him the faintest smile, one that said, "It's not you, it's them." The Whitmore son, Nathaniel, stepped closer, his voice laced with arrogance. "Tell you what, there's a staff lounge near the kitchen. If you hurry, maybe no one else will notice this little accident." Laughter again. Laughter that dripped like venom. Lena inhaled, steadying herself. In that breath lived generations. Her father who marched across Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, her mother who sat at counters where she wasn't welcome, her grandmother who hummed freedom songs while folding laundry for families who dismissed her worth. Their voices whispered now, rising within her, "Do not shrink. Stand tall. They may mock, but they cannot erase who you are." She wanted to speak, but she also wanted to wait. Timing was everything, in courtrooms, in boardrooms, and in ballrooms filled with gilded prejudice. "Excuse me," a voice broke through, deep, steady, carrying authority. Isaiah Carter, one of the senior advisors from Lena's firm, had entered just in time. He placed a firm hand on her shoulder, his eyes meeting hers with reassurance. "Everything all right here?" The Whitmores shifted uncomfortably. They hadn't expected witnesses. But Isaiah's presence alone wasn't enough to stop their cruelty. Eleanor Whitmore raised her chin. "Of course everything is fine. We were simply clarifying." Isaiah's eyes narrowed, his voice calm but weighted. "Clarifying what?" "That prejudice still finds a comfortable home in rooms built on wealth." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Phones lifted discreetly. Cameras focused. The scene, once private, had become a spectacle. And in that moment, Lena realized something. The Whitmores weren't just mocking her. They were exposing themselves. The orchestra played louder, as though trying to erase the tension. But history was already being written in whispers, in recordings, in the quiet determination rising in Lena's chest. And she knew, this night wasn't going to end the way the Whitmores imagined. Not at all. The air inside the ballroom thickened, heavy with judgment and curiosity. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above, but down on the marble floor, the glow seemed harsher, unforgiving, a spotlight on one woman being asked, no ordered, to shrink. Lena Brooks stood still, her sequin gown glittering like a quiet rebellion, her posture refusing to bend under the Whitmore family's mocking eyes. Around her, voices murmured, sharp as the clinking of champagne glasses. Did she just say she doesn't belong? A woman whispered near the bar. Who invited her? A man muttered, eyes narrowing as though wealth alone granted authority to decide worth. Eleanor Whitmore adjusted her silver shawl and leaned closer, her voice low enough for Lena, but sharp enough for those nearby to overhear. Sweetheart, these gatherings are delicate. You may feel out of place, but let's not make this harder for everyone else. Quiet exits are best. The words dripped with condescension, the kind that smiled while it cut. Lena's hands remained at her sides, still, controlled. Years of boardrooms, negotiations, and being underestimated had taught her the art of stillness. Stillness that spoke louder than shouting. Stillness that unnerved those who thrived on belittling others. But Nathaniel Whitmore wasn't unsettled. He was emboldened. He smirked, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. She won't last 5 minutes here. Look around, no one is going to defend her. A hush swept the corner of the room. Eyes shifted again, not to Lena this time, but to the people around her. Who would speak? Who would risk their own standing? And then, from near the orchestra pit, came a voice, firm, aged, carrying the weight of lived truth. Careful, young man. An older black woman, her hair silver like wisdom itself, stepped forward. She wore a simple navy dress, nothing compared to the Whitmore's gowns and jewels, but her presence carried more weight than gold. Her name was Ruth Daniels, a retired professor and one of the evening's community honorees. I've lived long enough to know that the ugliest rooms are often the ones with the brightest chandeliers, Ruth said, her gaze fixed on Nathaniel. You ought to check your tone before you embarrass this family more than you already have. The room shifted. Gasp. Raised eyebrows. Discomfort. Not everyone agreed with Ruth, but everyone listened. Her courage cracked the perfect porcelain mask of the gala. Nathaniel scoffed. Embarrass? Please. This is about standards. Traditions. She doesn't belong in this circle, and everyone knows it. His words burned, echoing louder than the orchestra. A circle of laughter swelled from his companions, though thinner now, less confident under Ruth's steady glare. Isaiah Carter stepped in, his broad shoulders squaring against the Whitmore arrogance. You're right about one thing, Nathaniel. Everyone will remember this moment. But not the way you think. The tension stretched, sharp as broken glass beneath silk shoes. Phones, once hidden, were lifted openly now. Guests angled their cameras carefully, pretending to text but capturing the confrontation. Eleanor's smile tightened, cracks forming beneath the weight of her family's arrogance. She leaned toward Ruth, her tone patronizing. Please, Professor Daniels, let's not make this dramatic. We're simply maintaining the dignity of the event. Ruth's laugh, soft, bitter, rolled across the room. Dignity? You can't humiliate a woman publicly, dismiss her worth, and then speak of dignity as if it were your private inheritance. The orchestra faltered again. The ballroom had become something else entirely, not a celebration but a tribunal. A stage where prejudice strutted proudly, only to find itself surrounded by witnesses who would not forget. And through it all, Lena remained still. Her silence unnerved them more than words could. She could see it in their eyes. Confusion, frustration, the fear of not knowing what she might reveal. Why isn't she leaving? Someone whispered. Maybe she's too proud. Maybe she's someone important. The last comment hung in the air. Important. The word clung to the chandeliers, echoed off the marble floors. The Whitmores shifted, their certainty cracking just slightly. Eleanor cleared her throat, forcing the attention back to her. Regardless of opinions, this is our family's event. And as hosts, we reserve the right to determine appropriate company. Her words landed like a gavel. Final. Dismissive. Cold. Lena finally moved. Just slightly. She tilted her head, her eyes meeting Eleanor's with calm precision, the way a seasoned lawyer dismantles a weak argument in court. Appropriate company? Lena repeated softly. Her voice carried, calm yet cutting through the air like a hymn through silence. Tell me, Mrs. Whitmore, what defines that in your world? Skin tone? Bloodline? Wealth? The question stopped the room. No laughter. No murmurs. Just silence, thick and waiting. Eleanor's lips parted, but no answer came. Not one that could survive the cameras, the witnesses, the whispers that would soon leave this golden ballroom and spread like wildfire. Lena let the silence sit. Let it grow. Because she knew, silence, when wielded correctly, could be louder than thunder. And then, slowly she smiled. It wasn't the smile of defeat. It was the smile of someone holding a secret so heavy it could topple empires. The Whitmores didn't know it yet, but they had mocked the very woman who controlled the future of their billion-dollar deal. And before the night was over, the empire they flaunted so arrogantly would begin to crumble. The ballroom was no longer the Whitmores' domain. It was a storm gathering, each breath of silence another roll of distant thunder. Guests shifted nervously, some pretending to check their watches, others sneaking cautious glances at Lena Brooks, as though trying to solve a puzzle no one dared voice aloud. Eleanor Whitmore tried to retake control, her smile stretched thin across her face like glass about to crack. She gestured sharply to a young server hovering near the champagne tower. Escort our guest to the lobby. Politely, of course. The word guest carried venom, each syllable punctuated with quiet superiority. The server hesitated, his hands trembling around the silver tray. He was no older than 20, a young black man named Darius working 2 jobs to cover his tuition. His eyes flicked to Lena, then back to Eleanor. Something inside him twisted. He knew what this was. He'd felt it before in stores, on sidewalks, and classrooms. That same quiet dismissal, the same suggestion that his presence was somehow a disruption. But now he stood frozen, caught between the power of his paycheck and the weight of his conscience. Go on, Eleanor pressed, her tone leaving no room for debate. Lena's eyes met Darius's. A silent exchange. No words, just recognition. She gave the faintest shake of her head as though telling him, don't carry their burden. Don't let them make you part of this. Before Darius could move, another voice broke through the tension. This isn't right. It came from a corner of the room near the grand piano. A woman in her 40s, elegantly dressed in emerald silk, set down her glass with a deliberate clink. Her name was Angela Price, a rising businesswoman who had once been overlooked in the same circles for her accent, her background, her refusal to play small. You don't get to decide who belongs based on your prejudice, Angela continued, her voice steady but rising. I've watched this family humiliate people before, but tonight, it feels uglier than ever. Gasps rippled. It wasn't done. Speaking against the Whitmores in their own ballroom was nearly unthinkable. But Angela had said what dozens were thinking, and once words were spoken, they couldn't be taken back. Eleanor's face hardened, her hand tightening on the stem of her glass. Angela, darling, I'd expect better manners from you. Perhaps you've forgotten who makes these events possible. Angela didn't flinch. And perhaps you've forgotten that dignity isn't for sale, Mrs. Whitmore? A murmur of agreement spread across the room. It wasn't loud, but it was there, like the first drops of rain on stone. The tide was shifting slowly against the Whitmores. Nathaniel, red-faced, stepped forward again. Enough. This circus has gone on too long. Remove her now before she embarrasses herself further. He reached out as though to take Lena by the arm. Isaiah Carter moved before he could, placing himself squarely between Nathaniel and Lena. His voice was low, steady, but carried the force of warning honed from years of protecting what mattered. Touch her and you'll regret it. The words hung heavy. Nathaniel faltered, his hand hovering midair, caught between arrogance and fear. And then came the sound, soft at first, then multiplying. Phones clicking. Cameras recording. The ballroom, once a sanctuary for unchecked arrogance, had become a stage with an audience far wider than the chandeliers could see. Social media was already awake, watching, documenting. One guest whispered near the back, "She looks familiar. I've seen her somewhere." Another replied, "Maybe in the business journals? I swear I've read her name." Eleanor caught the whispers. A shadow of unease passed across her face. For the first time, she considered the possibility that this woman they mocked might not be ordinary. That perhaps their assumptions, their insults, their arrogance, had been aimed at someone whose shadow stretched farther than their own. But pride is a cruel master. Eleanor straightened her shawl and lifted her chin. Regardless of speculation, this is a private affair. Miss Brooks, I insist you leave now. The words Miss Brooks were deliberate, stripped of respect, reduced, meant to diminish. Lena finally spoke again, her voice calm, melodic, but cutting through the air like the low hum of a hymn. I will leave when I choose. Not when arrogance commands it. The stillness that followed was electric. Ruth Daniels smiled softly, Angela Price folded her arms, and Isaiah didn't move an inch. The allies were there now, visible, unafraid. And in the corner, unnoticed by most, a local journalist who had been invited for society coverage quietly raised her camera. Her name was Jennifer Martinez, and she knew a headline when it unfolded before her eyes. What began as whispers in a ballroom was about to ripple far beyond these walls. Lena's gaze swept the room, her eyes lingering on the gilded chandeliers, the marble floors, the polished arrogance of the Whitmore empire. And she thought of her father, who had marched in Selma, who had told her once, "One day you'll face a room that tells you to leave. And you'll know, baby girl, you were meant to stay." She smiled again, faint but sure. Because what the Whitmores didn't realize yet was this: she wasn't the guest at their party. They were the ones standing on borrowed ground. And soon the world would see it. Have you ever stood in a room where every eye judged you before you even spoke? That question lingered in the air, though Lena hadn't asked it aloud. It lived in the silence, in the sharp stares, in the weight pressing down on her shoulders. And yet, her shoulders did not bend. The Whitmores were crumbling, though they didn't know it yet. Arrogance blinded them, the way smoke blinds you before the fire consumes the house. Nathaniel leaned closer, his breath heavy with wine and entitlement. "Listen carefully," he said through clenched teeth, his whisper loud enough for the crowd to hear. "This is our world. People like you," he sneered, gesturing toward her dress, her skin, her very being, "don't get invitations, don't get respect, and certainly don't get a seat at our table." The cruelty was deliberate, sharp enough to cut, but Lena's expression remained untouched. Calm, unyielding. Her silence was louder than his tirade. Angela Price shook her head in disgust. "Nathaniel, you don't even hear yourself, do you? You're a walking headline waiting to happen." Jennifer Martinez, the journalist, nearly smiled behind her camera. She was recording every word now, her instincts screaming that this was bigger than society gossip. This was history in the making. Eleanor tried to mask her son's venom with a brittle laugh. "Ignore him, darlings. He's had too much to drink." She turned back to Lena with a mock sweetness that dripped like spoiled honey. "But truly, Miss Brooks, surely you must see how uncomfortable your presence makes our guests. Wouldn't it be easier for all if you simply left quietly?" A hush followed, as though the entire ballroom leaned forward to hear Lena's response. She didn't move, didn't flinch. Instead, she let her voice rise, smooth, resonant, with the authority of a hymn sung in church basements and protest marches alike. "Do you know what makes me uncomfortable, Mrs. Whitmore? It's not the chandeliers or the marble floors, nor the way you cling to titles and legacies. What makes me uncomfortable, what should make all of us uncomfortable, is the ease with which you strip dignity from people you deem beneath you." The words rippled across the ballroom. Some guests averted their eyes, ashamed. Others straightened, emboldened. Even Darius, the young server, stood taller, as though her words gave him permission to breathe. Nathaniel barked a laugh, brittle and ugly. "Dignity? Spare us the sermon. This is business, not Sunday service." But Isaiah Carter stepped forward, his voice steady, his gaze locked on Nathaniel. "Then you'd better treat it like business, son. Because disrespect costs more than you can afford." The line hit like a hammer. Phones captured every second. Comments began flooding live feeds. The Whitmores thought they were containing humiliation to four walls, but humiliation had wings now, and it was flying far beyond their reach. In the corner, Ruth Daniels whispered to Angela, "Something's happening here. She's not just some guest. She's someone." Angela nodded slowly. "Oh, she's definitely someone." Eleanor, sensing the whispers, pushed harder. Her pride wouldn't let go, even as her grip slipped. "If you truly had any place among us, Miss Brooks, you'd show proof. Connections. Credentials. Otherwise you're nothing but an interloper." Lena tilted her head, her smile faint, deliberate. She knew this moment was coming, the demand for proof, the challenge hurled in arrogance. And she welcomed it. She reached for her clutch resting on the nearby chair, her movements calm and visible, never hurried. The crowd tensed as though expecting drama, and in a way they were right. Because inside that clutch wasn't just lipstick or keys. It was the truth wrapped in leather, embossed with gold. Her fingers brushed the edge, but she paused, drawing in the anticipation like a maestro before striking the first chord of a symphony. "I'll show you proof," she said softly, her voice steady as the storm built around her. "But when I do, remember this moment. Remember the insults. Remember the arrogance. Remember how quick you were to decide who belonged and who didn't. The Whitmores froze. Nathaniel's face paled, though pride kept his lips curved in a smirk. Eleanor's eyes narrowed, but for the first time, uncertainty flickered in their depths. The ballroom's air thickened, alive with suspense. Guests whispered. Phones rolled. Journalists leaned closer. And then, before Lena could reveal what she carried, something shattered the tension like a thunderclap. A voice from the back of the ballroom rang out, firm and certain. She doesn't need to prove anything to you. It was Mrs. Hayes, the elderly woman seated quietly near the buffet all evening, her cane resting against the chair. No one had noticed her much before. But now, every eye turned as she stood, her posture regal, her voice steady with decades of lived truth. I know who she is, Mrs. Hayes said. And if you knew too, you'd be trembling already. Gasps erupted. Eleanor's hand trembled against her glass. Nathaniel's smirk wavered. And Lena? She simply smiled. Because the time for revelation had finally come. Have you ever seen arrogance dissolve in an instant, like sugar melting in boiling water? That was the sight before the crowd now. The Whitmores, faces once smug and untouchable, stood frozen as Mrs. Hayes's voice echoed through the ballroom. Her words carried the weight of 4 decades in courthouse corridors, where dignity had to be carved out of prejudice and truth fought for its own survival. She doesn't need to prove anything to you, Mrs. Hayes repeated, her cane tapping once on the marble floor, each strike punctuating her authority. I've seen that face before, on magazine covers and business journals, in boardroom victories they swore she couldn't win. That woman is Lena Brooks. And she doesn't just belong here, she owns the ground you're standing on. The ballroom erupted into whispers that rose like a tide. Guests craned their necks, searching their memories, recalling headlines they had once skimmed over morning coffee. Lena Brooks, tech investor. Billion-dollar deals. The quiet storm behind companies reshaping industries. Eleanor's wine glass slipped from her hand, shattering against the marble. Red spread across the floor like spilled blood. Impossible, Nathaniel stammered, his arrogance cracking into disbelief. You're just... He stopped himself before finishing the sentence, but the word hung there, unspoken yet clear. Just black. Just a woman. Just not one of us. Lena didn't flinch. She let the silence stretch, the power shift grow undeniable. Then, with deliberate grace, she opened her clutch and withdrew the leather-bound folder. Embossed in gold across the cover. Confidential contract agreement, Whitmore Global Holdings. She placed it on the nearest table, flipped it open, and slid the first page toward Eleanor. The crowd leaned in, holding their breath. It was a contract. Stamped, signed, and dated. Lena Brooks, primary investor. Amount, $1.2 billion. Conditions, pending final approval. Gasps cut through the room. Someone dropped their phone. Jennifer Martinez's camera zoomed in, capturing every line of ink like scripture. I came tonight, Lena began, her voice steady, not to beg for respect, not to plead for inclusion, but to finalize this deal. Your company, your legacy, was about to merge with mine. Until this evening, when you showed me the truth of who you are. She turned, her eyes locking on Eleanor, then Nathaniel, then every guest who had laughed, whispered, or smirked. You mocked me for my skin, for my presence, for daring to exist in a space you claim as yours. But let me tell you, this space? These chandeliers, these walls, this empire? It stands on the shaky legs of borrowed money. Without this deal, without my approval, it collapses. Phones shook in trembling hands as live streams hit record-breaking numbers. Comments flew across screens. This is history. Power revealed. The tables just turned. Eleanor's lips quivered. She reached for the contract with desperate fingers, but Lena's hand pressed down firmly, stopping her. You don't get to touch this, Lena said, her tone soft yet razor-sharp. Not after tonight. This billion-dollar deal. She lifted the folder slowly, held it high for the cameras to see, and then, without hesitation, tore the pages down the middle. The sound of paper ripping sliced through the ballroom louder than any orchestra could play. Nathaniel lunged forward. You can't. Do you know what you've just done? That's generational wealth. That's our family's future. Lena's eyes locked on him, fierce and unblinking. Your future was never built on respect. It was built on exclusion, on arrogance, on believing black voices didn't matter. Tonight I reminded you, we matter. I matter. And I will not fund your hate. The crowd erupted, not in mockery this time, but in applause. Cheers broke out, swelling like a gospel choir, reverberating off marble and glass. Even the staff, servers, security, musicians, joined in, their claps and shouts echoing years of suppressed defiance. Mrs. Hayes, tears glistening in her eyes, whispered, "Lord, I lived long enough to see this day." Jennifer Martinez whispered to her cameraman, "This is going viral before the hour ends. Careers are ending and a movement is beginning." Eleanor collapsed into a chair, her face pale, her fortune slipping through her fingers like sand. Nathaniel cursed under his breath, his bravado in tatters. And Lena? She stood taller than ever, the image of dignity and strength, her voice rising one last time for the cameras, for the crowd, for the millions who would watch this moment replay across screens. "You tried to humiliate me. Instead, you exposed yourselves. And let this be clear, every deal, every boardroom, every table I walk into from this day forward, I won't just sit. I'll lead. And I'll make sure no one else has to beg for a place." The applause roared again. Guests rose to their feet. And somewhere, faint but certain, a gospel hymn hummed from Mrs. Hayes's lips. A melody of triumph, of generations lifted, of justice finally finding its voice. Have you ever seen an empire begin to crumble in real time, while the whole world watches? That was exactly what unfolded in the aftermath of Lena's declaration. The ballroom, once a fortress of privilege and entitlement, was now a storm of chaos. Guests who had smirked minutes ago now whispered nervously, their voices sharp with fear of being caught on camera. Phones streamed live from every corner. TikTok clips, Facebook Lives, Twitter threats, the story spread like wildfire. Within 10 minutes, hashtags dominated the digital skyline. Hashtag Lena Brooks, hashtag $1 billion lesson, hashtag respect Black excellence. Eleanor's carefully sculpted social mask shattered entirely. She clutched Nathaniel's arm, begging him in frantic whispers. "Say something, fix this, we can't lose everything." But Nathaniel's bravado had drained out of him, leaving only panic. "Do you know what this means?" he snapped back. "Our stocks, our investors. By morning the board will be calling emergency sessions. We'll be ruined." Lena heard every word, but her expression remained composed, almost regal. For her, this wasn't about financial ruin. This was about something deeper, the centuries of humiliation carried in black memory, the silent sacrifices of elders who had endured insults without the power to strike back. Tonight she wasn't just Lena Brooks. She was their voice. Jennifer Martinez's microphone thrust forward, her cameraman's red light glowing. "Ms. Brooks, excuse me, Judge Brooks, can you share what message you want the world to take from this moment?" Lena turned to the camera, her eyes reflecting the chandelier's glow. "The message is simple," she said softly, but her words cut through the room like thunder. "Respect is not a luxury. It is a right. And when respect is denied because of race, gender, or history, it will always have consequences. Tonight, those consequences cost the Whitmores $1 billion. Tomorrow they will cost them much more." The applause grew again, but this time it was joined by chants. From the back of the room, a young black server raised his fist, calling out, "Power to the people." The word spread like a spark catching dry wood. "Power to the people," the staff repeated. "Power to the people." Guests shifted uncomfortably as the energy transformed. This was no longer a party. It was a movement. Mrs. Hayes stepped forward, her eyes fierce behind her glasses. "Lena, baby, don't let this end here. Too many of us fought too long for nights like this. You've got the spotlight, now use it." Lena nodded slowly as if the weight of generations pressed on her shoulders. She raised her hand for silence. "This is not about one insult. This is not about one family. This is about every boardroom where voices like mine are silenced, every contract where black entrepreneurs are underestimated, every room where we are told we don't belong. Tonight, the Whitmores showed the world what bias looks like in its purest form. And tonight, I showed them that bias comes with a price tag." The crowd erupted, half in cheers, half in gasps. But Lena wasn't finished. "I will be calling a press conference tomorrow morning," she continued. "And I will announce new initiatives, funding for black-owned startups, diversity accountability measures, and legal action against discriminatory practices. No more whispers. No more quiet endurance. It ends tonight." The words rolled through the ballroom like a sermon, and for a moment, it felt like church. Even those who had come to mock stood transfixed, as if history itself had stepped into the room. Meanwhile, the Whitmores crumbled further. Eleanor staggered toward Lena, her voice breaking. Please, Lena. We can apologize. We can make this right. Surely you don't mean to destroy us." Lena's eyes cut into her like steel. "You destroyed yourselves the moment you believed my presence was a threat. You don't get to rebuild on my back." A cheer broke out, louder than any yet, and for the first time in her privileged life, Eleanor Whitmore looked truly small. Outside, reporters swarmed the gates, their cameras ready, their headlines already written. Billionaire Lena Brooks cancels $1 billion deal after racist humiliation. Stock tickers began to flash warnings as investors pulled out. By morning, the Whitmores would face not only disgrace but financial collapse. Inside, Lena took one last look around the ballroom. She saw allies, Mrs. Hayes standing tall, the young server wiping a tear, Jennifer Martinez already drafting her broadcast. She saw enemies, Eleanor crumpled in defeat, Nathaniel shaking with fury. And she saw herself reflected in the eyes of those watching online, millions of people who had known humiliation but never had the power to answer it. Tonight Lena had answered. The gospel hum from Mrs. Hayes swelled again, this time joined by others in the room. A chorus began, quiet but steady, a hymn of survival, of triumph, of legacy. Lena lifted her chin. This isn't the end. This is only the beginning. Have you ever witnessed the moment when humiliation is transformed into power, when pain becomes prophecy? That was the air on the morning after the Whitmore Gala. New York City buzzed like a living organism, pulsing with headlines, whispers, and live updates. News vans lined the courthouse steps. Protesters gathered with signs reading "Respect Black Wealth and We Belong Everywhere." Reporters clamored for a glimpse of Lena Brooks, the woman who had turned a billion-dollar insult into a national reckoning. The Whitmores, once untouchable, were unraveling. Their stocks plummeted. Corporate partners cut ties overnight. Eleanor's charities returned donations, her name stripped from plaques. Nathaniel was summoned to emergency hearings by his board, accused of gross misconduct and brand destruction. Their empire, polished for decades, cracked under the weight of one night's arrogance. But Lena was not thinking about their downfall. She was thinking about her ancestors. She remembered the stories her grandmother told, of being denied service at diners, of sitting in the back of buses, of watching opportunities handed to others simply because of skin color. She remembered her father's words, "Dignity, Lena, is the crown they can never take. Wear it boldly." Now it was her turn to place that crown on full display. At 11 a.m., Lena stepped out onto the courthouse steps. The crowd surged, cameras flashed, and chants swelled. She wore her robe, not of velvet or silk, but of power, a deep purple suit tailored like armor, the Brooks family pin gleaming at her chest. Behind her stood allies, Mrs. Hayes, strong despite her cane, the young server from the gala, and a coalition of black entrepreneurs, lawyers, and activists who had rushed to her side. Jennifer Martinez held her mic high, but Lena raised her hand, commanding silence. The city hushed. Even traffic seemed to pause. "My name," Lena began, her voice carrying like a hymn through the cold air, "is Lena Brooks. Last night I was mocked, dismissed, and humiliated because of the color of my skin. But today I stand not just for myself. I stand for every black man and woman who has ever been told they don't belong." The crowd erupted, fists raised, chants echoing. But Lena pressed on. "We are here to say no more. No more boardrooms where we are silenced. No more deals where we are underestimated. No more seats denied, voices muted, or talents dismissed. We have built this country with our hands, our songs, our prayers, and we will not be erased." Mrs. Hayes began humming again, her gospel tune rising over the steps. Others joined until the courthouse itself seemed to sing. Lena's words floated above the chorus. "Today I am announcing the Brooks Initiative for Equity and Justice. $1 billion will be invested into black-owned businesses, diversity accountability programs, and legal action against discrimination in corporate America. This is not charity. This is justice. This is the harvest of seeds planted by generations before me." Tears streaked down faces in the crowd. The young server sobbed openly, whispering, "She's changing everything." "And to the Whitmores," Lena continued, her tone steady but sharp, "you thought you were mocking me. But you were mocking the spirit of progress, the dream of Dr. King, the courage of Rosa Parks, the strength of every ancestor who refused to bow. And that mockery has cost you more than money. It has cost you your place in history." A roar erupted, the sound of thousands rising together. Inside the Whitmore mansion, Eleanor watched on a trembling screen, her empire dissolving with every word. Nathaniel sat hollow-eyed, his phone buzzing with resignation demands. They were no longer the hosts of the gala. They were the cautionary tale. Back on the steps, Lena raised her hands one final time. "This is not just my stand. This is our stand. Your stand. Because when one of us rises, we all rise. And when we claim dignity, we lift generations." The chant began again, louder, bolder. Power to the people. Power to the people. Lena smiled, not for the cameras but for her grandmother, her father, and the countless names etched in memory who had prayed for this day. As the chants echoed through the city, Lena whispered to herself, "This isn't the end. This is the legacy." And with that, she walked down the courthouse steps, not as a victim, not even just as a billionaire, but as a symbol. A reminder that dignity once claimed could never again be denied.